A widowed millionaire saw a nanny breastfeeding his baby. What he did next changed everything. The cry of a baby tore through the stillness of the grand mansion, like a siren echoing against the cold walls. For more than 3 hours that desperate sound had not stopped, bouncing down the marble corridors, climbing the dark mahogany stairs, turning the entire house into a suffocating cage. Downstairs, Isabella Torres bent low, scrubbing the same gleaming patch of floor for the 4th time. She was 24, her hands hardened by endless labor, her eyes vacant, yet her chest tightened with every echo of that cry from above. 6 weeks earlier, Isabella had lost her newborn son, barely old enough to open his eyes to the world. Since then, the sound of a baby's cry had become a blade, twisting inside wounds that had not healed. And tonight, that cry was awakening all her buried pain. "This baby will exhaust himself crying like this," Isabella whispered, but her hand pressed harder on the rag, as if scrubbing could drown out reality. Upstairs, Ethan Carter, only 2 months old, lay red-faced, lips cracked and dry, mouth moving weakly in search of something he could not find. Beside the crib sat a bottle, sour-smelling, spoiled hours ago in the afternoon heat. Melissa Adams, the 28-year-old nanny hired from an expensive agency, had disappeared 6 hours earlier. She had claimed she was going to the pharmacy to buy special formula for Ethan. In truth, Melissa was at the mall, laughing with friends, carrying bags of luxury clothes, unconcerned about the baby she was paid to care for. To her, this job was nothing more than easy money. Meanwhile, behind a closed wooden door on the 1st floor, Daniel Carter, 35, Ethan's father, sat in his office. CEO of a thriving tech company, he was a man with sunken eyes, dark circles carved deep into his face that even the strongest coffee couldn't hide. For 2 hours, he had been locked in a tense virtual meeting with Japanese investors. The only sound breaking through the numbers and charts was his son's relentless cry. "Mr. Carter, do you confirm the investment?" a voice asked through the screen. "Of course, you can count on us," Daniel replied automatically, his eyes drifting to the framed photo on his desk. It was Claire, his late wife, who had died during childbirth, leaving Ethan behind. While Daniel forced himself to focus, Ethan's cries weakened, choked, turning dangerously faint. Isabella's heart raced wildly. She slammed the rag onto the floor, unable to endure another second. Her footsteps pounded against the wooden stairs, her trembling hand gripping the banister. "Please, God, don't let anything happen to this baby," she whispered between rushed breaths. The door swung open. What she saw drained the blood from her face. Ethan lay limp in his crib, eyes half closed, his tiny body burning hot, his breath shallow and ragged. His lips kept moving, searching desperately for milk, but finding only emptiness. "Dear Lord!" Isabella rushed forward, lifting the baby into her trembling arms. Ethan's body was slick with sweat, radiating heat like burning coal. The sour stench of the bottle on the nightstand made her grimace in disgust. It was completely spoiled. The infant squirmed weakly in her embrace, mouth latching onto nothing, begging for salvation. In that moment, something deep inside Isabella broke open. For 6 weeks her body had still produced milk, though her own baby was gone. Watching Ethan fade in the same way her son had, the grief surged uncontrollably. She stopped thinking. Instinct took over, the instinct of a mother. Dropping into the armchair by the window, Isabella unbuttoned her blouse with shaking hands and pulled Ethan to her chest. Instantly, the crying ceased. Ethan latched on fiercely, drinking with the desperation of someone starved for life itself. "It's okay now, little one. You're safe," Isabella whispered, tears sliding down her hollow cheeks. And in that fragile moment, for the first time in 6 weeks, a sliver of peace returned to her broken heart. Isabella sat frozen in the armchair, her trembling arms holding Ethan tightly against her chest. The violent cries had vanished, replaced by the fragile sounds of life, the faint but determined gulps of a baby who had just discovered hope after hours of despair. Tears streamed down Isabella's cheeks. For 6 weeks her body had continued to produce milk, each drop a cruel reminder that her own child no longer lived. At first, she had tried to suppress it, taken remedies, prayed for it to stop. Yet every morning she awoke with swollen, aching breasts that screamed of a baby who would never need her again. And now that very milk was saving another little soul. She lowered her gaze, watching Ethan's flushed face soften as his breathing grew steadier. His tiny hands clutched her blouse, gripping life itself. Isabella's heart clenched, but this time not only with grief. Something deeper surged through her, an unshakable, primal instinct of motherhood she could no longer resist. "Drink, little one. Let me save you," Isabella whispered, her voice cracked and raw, speaking as much to herself as to the baby. In that instant, she forgot every boundary. She forgot she was only a maid in this grand mansion. She forgot Daniel Carter, the wealthy man downstairs, could walk in at any moment. She forgot the judgment of a world that would never understand. All that remained was her and the baby in her arms, alive because of her. Time seemed to slow. Ethan stopped crying altogether. His heavy eyelids closed, surrendering to peaceful sleep. His tiny face softened into the innocence of an angel. Isabella gazed down at him, and for the first time since her loss, peace brushed against her broken soul. But the moment did not last. The door creaked open and Daniel's figure appeared. He froze on the threshold. His weary businessman's eyes widened, locking onto the scene before him. Isabella sitting in the armchair, blouse unbuttoned, Ethan pressed close to her chest. The late afternoon light streamed through the curtains, bathing them in a gentle glow, a portrait of serenity. For several seconds, Daniel couldn't breathe. His heart pounded wildly, tangled in shock, confusion, and something else he dared not name. What are you doing?" Daniel's voice broke the silence, husky, edged with suspicion. Isabella nearly jumped. She hastily covered herself, clutching Ethan protectively, her eyes wide with panic. "Sir, I can explain." Her voice cracked, trembling. Daniel stepped closer, his gaze locked on her. His thoughts swirled chaotically. Part of him burned with anger at this overstep, yet another part couldn't ignore the truth. His son was quiet for the first time in weeks, peacefully asleep, no longer wailing in torment. The tension hung heavy in the air, a silence so thick it threatened to crush all 3 souls in that room. Daniel stood frozen in the room, his eyes locked on Isabella. In her arms, Ethan slept peacefully, his breathing steady, as though he had never spent hours crying in despair. At that moment, Daniel should have felt relief, but instead, chaos stormed inside him. Part of him wanted to admit Isabella had just saved his son's life. But another voice hissed sharply in his mind. "She crossed the line. She is not his mother." "You're not allowed to—" Daniel tried to speak, but the words died. He stepped back, almost startled by his own reaction. Isabella clutched Ethan closer, her head bowed. "I'm sorry, but he was on the verge of collapsing. The bottle was spoiled. There was nothing left for him. I couldn't just let him die like that." Daniel's fists tightened, his chest heaving. He looked at his son, seeing him rest calmly for the first time since Claire's death. Yet his thoughts churned, tangled in suspicion, refusing to release their grip. That afternoon, when Melissa returned, Daniel was still restless. She breezed in, arms full of shopping bags, covering her absence with a flimsy excuse about special formula. But her shifty eyes couldn't disguise the unease in the air. Isabella remained silent, avoiding Daniel's gaze. She knew she had crossed a fragile line, one society would never forgive. By evening, Melissa's whispers had already spread. "They say the maid breastfed Mr. Carter's son." "Really? That's disgusting. Who does she think she is?" Women like that are dangerous. She lost her baby, went mad, and now she's clinging to another woman's child. Within one night, the affluent neighborhood buzzed. Gossip traveled beyond Carter's home, spilling into women's clubs, afternoon teas, and endless group chats. Daniel's phone rang. Patricia, the notorious busybody neighbor. "Daniel, dear, I heard what happened. You need to be careful with that girl. A woman who's lost her child can become obsessive. People say she looks at Ethan as if he were her own." He pressed his temples, forcing his voice steady. "Patricia, don't believe every rumor." "Rumor? Everyone is talking about it. You have to protect your family, your reputation, son." Each word sliced into him like a knife. The pressure mounted from every direction. In the kitchen, Isabella overheard fragments of the gossip. Her heart trembled. She knew sooner or later the storm of judgment would crush her. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He sat in his office, staring at Claire's photograph, asking silently, "If you were here, what would you think of this? Would you forgive me for allowing another woman to hold our son this way?" Social pressure, the grief of loss, the suspicion in his own heart, all knotted into a chokehold. Social, family, and peer pressure weighed heavily on Daniel Carter. He watched Isabella Torres play with Ethan, seeing his son happier than ever before, yet his heart was torn apart. The words of others were like thorns that kept cutting into him. At last he coldly said to Isabella in his office, "You are fired." Isabella burst into tears, begging, "Please let me stay, at least to say goodbye to Ethan." But Daniel turned his face away, unable to bear looking into those desperate eyes. She left the mansion under the pouring rain, carrying only a small bag. From the window, Daniel saw her lonely figure fade behind the street corner, his heart aching. Yet the ringing phone pulled him back to the affirmations that he had done the right thing. In the days that followed, Isabella knocked on doors looking for work, but everyone asked, "Do you have a reference letter from your former employer?" Daniel never answered the phone, leaving her with nothing to prove herself. Gradually, her money ran out. She was evicted from her rented room after 2 months of unpaid debt. With only a few belongings stuffed in a plastic bag, Isabella was forced to sleep on the streets. Her first night outside, Isabella curled up on a park bench with an old newspaper draped over her. The wind bit through the thin fabric, gnawing at her skin. She trembled, wide awake under the flickering streetlights. Every noise made her flinch. She didn't close her eyes once. On the second night, under the shelter of a crumbling awning, 3 men approached. "Well, look at you," one sneered. "Pretty girl wandering alone?" Her heart raced. "We can give you a place if you know how to be grateful," another smirked. Isabella bolted, bare feet splashing through puddles, mud spraying. She hid behind a church wall until dawn. By the 3rd night, her body was giving out. Fits of coughing burned her chest. Staggering, she heard a gravelly voice. "First time on the streets, isn't it?" She looked up to see an old man, around 60, with white hair and a frail frame but kind eyes. He introduced himself as Mr. Howard, homeless for over a decade. "How did you know?" Isabella asked weakly. "You're still clean. Your eyes still carry hope. That's how new ones always look." He gestured toward a bridge. "Come on, there are a few of us there. At least you'll be safer." Beneath the bridge, Isabella met 5 others. Each had a piece of cardboard, a few ragged bags, and a tragic story. Mrs. Mercedes, who lost her house when her son sold everything for drugs. Jack, a former worker, crippled in an accident. They welcomed Isabella with weary but genuine smiles. "There are rules here," Mr. Howard explained. "Share when you can. Protect each other. Most important, don't lose your dignity, even if you lose everything else." Isabella nodded. But as days dragged on, her face grew gaunt, hair matted, clothes torn. Survival was a fight. scavenging dumpsters behind supermarkets, collecting bottles for coins. The cruelest part was waking each morning with aching, swollen breasts, milk still flowing. Her body reminded her she had enough to feed a baby. Yet her child was gone, and the only baby she had managed to save was taken from her arms. Through ragged coughs, Isabella tilted her head toward the gray sky and whispered, "Ethan, are you okay? Do you still remember me?" Inside the Carter mansion, Isabella's absence quickly left its mark. On the very first night, Ethan began crying until his tiny voice grew hoarse. Without warm arms to soothe him, he writhed in his crib, rejecting the bottle. Daniel picked him up, pacing the room for hours, trying to comfort him. "Daddy's here, Ethan. I'm right here," he whispered, his voice heavy with exhaustion. But Ethan squirmed, shoved the bottle away, and screamed until his face turned purple. That night, Daniel never closed his eyes. By dawn, his own eyes were bloodshot, his shirt wrinkled, while Ethan finally collapsed into sleep only from sheer exhaustion. Melissa seemed indifferent. She glanced at the baby and shrugged. "It's just a phase. Babies do that." But Daniel knew something was wrong. He even sensed relief in her demeanor, as if Ethan's cries freed her from responsibility. The next day, things worsened. Ethan refused to eat, his body thinning. Daniel hired an experienced nurse. After 2 hours of failed attempts, sweat beading her forehead, the nurse shook her head. "I've never seen a child this difficult. He seems to be rejecting everything." Desperate, Daniel brought in 2 more specialists. Carla, a newborn expert, frowned after observing. "Mr. Carter, this isn't only about feeding. This is psychological trauma. Even infants can suffer when they lose an emotional bond." "Bond?" "But his mother died at birth," Daniel stammered. "It doesn't have to be the mother," Carla explained. "It could be anyone the baby trusted, anyone he felt safe with." "Do you know of someone like that?" Daniel's throat tightened. One name flooded his mind, Isabella, but he swallowed it back. "No, no one in particular." The days dragged by. Ethan grew weaker, his skin pale, eyes sunken. Daniel sat beside his son's crib, feeling the same helplessness he'd felt the day Claire slipped away. Finally, pediatrician Dr. Villanueva examined the boy. His tone was grave. "Ethan has no major physical illness, but he is in dangerous condition due to emotional crisis. If this doesn't improve, we'll have to hospitalize him for close monitoring." Daniel cradled his son in his arms, his heart aching. He looked down at the fragile face and thought, "My boy is fading away." And it all began the moment Isabella left this house. 3 days after Ethan was admitted to the hospital, Daniel was on the verge of collapse. He shuttled between the hospital and his company, but his mind could no longer focus on business. Each time he saw his tiny son lying still in the hospital crib, IV line hanging beside him, Daniel's heart ripped apart. One afternoon, when Daniel returned to the mansion to collect more clothes, he overheard hushed voices in the back garden. He stepped closer, and the sight froze his blood. Melissa was handing over a box of Ethan's medication to a strange man. "This one's expensive, over $300. "You'll make a big profit reselling it," Melissa whispered. The man nodded, slipping money into her hand. Daniel exploded. He stormed forward, voice thundering, "Melissa, what the hell are you doing?" Melissa jumped, nearly dropping the box. Mr. Carter, I can explain." "Explain? You're stealing my son's medicine to sell?" Daniel roared, eyes blazing. The stranger bolted. Melissa trembled, fumbling for excuses. I needed money for my mother. She's very sick. I only meant to take a little." Daniel's fists clenched, his voice dropping to an icy tone. "How many times? How long have you been doing this?" Melissa bit her lip, avoiding his gaze. The silence stretched painfully long, broken only by Daniel's ragged breathing. Finally, as if the weight crushed her, she broke down, sobbing. "Fine, I admit it. I lied about Isabella. I made everything up. I was afraid of losing this job. Jealous because you trusted her more than me. But the truth is, she was the one who saved Ethan that day." Daniel stood frozen. His mind cracked open like thunder striking. The pieces finally fell into place. Isabella had never been a threat. On the contrary, she had saved his son. And he, blinded by lies, had cast her out, leaving his child to suffer. Guilt crashed over him, trembling through his hands. He whispered, almost inaudible, "I've made the biggest mistake of my life." When the door closed after his confrontation with Melissa, Daniel stood frozen in the darkness of the living room. His heart pounded, her confession echoing. It was Isabella who saved Ethan. I made it all up. He collapsed into a chair, burying his face in his hands. The memory of Isabella walking away in the rain, clutching her small bag, etched itself into his mind. A grieving woman, still carrying milk in her body, had saved the child he couldn't care for. And what had he done? Cast her into the streets without a penny, without protection. I have to find her, before it's too late. The next day, Daniel began his search. He went to Isabella's old boarding house. The manager shook his head. "She left 3 weeks ago, just carried a small bag, never came back." He tried employment centers. A worker scanned the lists. "Too many names every day. Hers isn't here." Hospitals, churches, even police stations, everywhere gave the same answer. Nothing. Each rejection squeezed his chest tighter. At night, Daniel drove through the city, past slums and parks, where hunched figures huddled under broken awnings. The rain smeared across his windshield like tears he could no longer hold back. He got out and asked, only to be met with wary eyes. "You a cop?" a bearded man snarled. "No, I'm looking for a girl named Isabella." But no one believed him. To them, Isabella was just another name among thousands lost each day to the city's shadows. 4 sleepless days dragged by. Daniel's beard grew ragged, eyes hollow, shirt rumpled. In the hospital, Ethan grew weaker. Doctors warned if nothing improved soon, they'd have to resort to drastic measures. On the 5th afternoon, when hope was almost gone, Daniel received an unexpected call. "Mr. Carter, this is Monica from the neighboring district. Yesterday, I saw a girl who looked like Isabella walking along the avenue. She looked sick, frail." Daniel's pulse raced. He scribbled the address and rushed out. For hours he searched the streets, but Isabella was nowhere to be found. Night fell. Daniel stood on the curb, clutching his head, swallowed by despair. Then his phone buzzed. An old, gravelly voice spoke. "You're the one looking for Isabella, aren't you?" Daniel nearly shouted. "Yes. Do you know where she is?" "My name is Howard. I lived on the streets with her for a while. The girl has suffered enough. But why are you looking for her?" Silence held Daniel for a moment before his voice cracked with desperation. "Because my son is dying in the hospital, and Isabella is the only one who can save him. I made a terrible mistake, and I have to fix it." There was a long pause. Finally, Howard's slow voice came through. "She's under the bridge at Avenida Caracas. But hear me, if you hurt her again, we will not forgive you." Daniel gripped the wheel, whispering, "I swear, I'll never let her suffer again." His car tore through the night, his heart blazing with a single purpose, to find Isabella before it was too late. Beneath the Avenida Caracas bridge, damp moss clung to the pillars, and the night air bit like knives. Daniel stumbled through the shadows, heart pounding with every echo of dripping water. Then he saw her, Isabella, curled in the corner like a fallen sparrow, a tattered blanket, her only shield against the world. She leaned against the wall, a tattered blanket draped over her thin shoulders. Her hair was tangled, her face pale almost to translucence. Cracks lined her dry lips, signs of thirst and hunger. A sudden cough shook her fragile frame, and Daniel's chest clenched. "Isabella!" His voice broke. She lifted her head. The once bright eyes now held only emptiness, barely a flicker of hope. At the sight of him, Isabella flinched, recoiling like a wounded bird, terrified of the hand that once cast it away. "What are you doing here?" Her voice was raspy, weak. Daniel stepped forward, then stopped short, afraid to scare her further. "Please, listen to me. Ethan, my son, he's in the hospital. He's very weak, and the doctors say only you can save him." Isabella let out a bitter, hollow laugh. "Save him? I already did. And what did I get? Thrown into the streets, shamed by the entire city? Do you think I can ever trust you again?" Daniel dropped to his knees before her, rain dripping from his hair onto his wrinkled shirt. "I was wrong, Isabella, terribly wrong. But please don't punish Ethan for my mistake. He needs you. He remembers you." Tears welled in Isabella's eyes as her body trembled. Her heart waged war within her. Part of her longed to turn away, to let this man suffer the weight of his choices. Yet somewhere deep inside, Ethan's faint cries still called to her. She bit her lip, then nodded faintly. "Fine, I'll go. But only for Ethan. After that, I'll leave your life forever." Daniel's throat tightened. All he could do was bow his head in gratitude. The car sped through the rain-soaked streets. At the hospital, when Isabella entered the room, Ethan lay limp in the crib, frail body trembling, lips bluish. Doctors and nurses hovered nearby, their faces grave. The moment Isabella whispered, "Ethan," tiny eyes cracked open, faint recognition lighting them. A tired smile touched his face. The entire room stilled, as if witnessing a miracle. Isabella sat down, gathering the child into her arms. Within seconds, the crying ceased. Ethan nestled into the familiar embrace, his breathing slowing, steadying. Tears blurred Daniel's vision as he watched. He knew in that moment that life had handed him a second chance, not just for Ethan, but for himself. From the moment Isabella returned to the hospital, Ethan's condition changed, as if by miracle. He began feeding again, sleeping peacefully in the arms he recognized. The doctors, astonished, admitted, "It's true, bond and affection can save a child's life." Daniel stayed close, silently watching. Every time Ethan gripped Isabella's finger tightly, Daniel's heart ached, part joy, part guilt. He knew the depth of his mistake, and now all he could do was try to atone through action. "Isabella," he said hesitantly one evening as she laid Ethan back into the hospital crib, "I want to thank you, not only for saving Ethan, but for coming back, even though I don't deserve it." Isabella didn't look at him. She smoothed Ethan's hair, her voice barely above a whisper. "I came back only for the boy." The words struck deep, but Daniel understood. Trust once shattered could not be rebuilt overnight. In the days that followed, Daniel began to act. He hired an attorney and arranged a press conference right at the hospital. Standing before the cameras, his voice firm, he declared, "Isabella Torres saved my son's life. Every rumor you've heard about her is a lie. I apologize for the injustice she has endured." The city was stunned. Melissa, who had spread the venomous lies, was fired immediately and became the subject of public scorn. Neighbors who once sneered at Isabella lowered their heads in shame when they crossed her path. Isabella heard the news but said nothing. She kept her focus on Ethan, her eyes tracing every tiny breath the child took. One afternoon, as the last light of day spilled through the hospital window, Ethan slept soundly. Daniel sat beside the bed, quietly confessing, I want to make it right, even if it takes my whole life." For a fleeting moment, Isabella looked at him. In her eyes flickered something, not hatred anymore, but caution, laced with the faintest spark of hope. 1 month later, Ethan was discharged from the hospital. His strength had returned, his eyes sparkled, and he smiled each time Isabella carried him. The same neighbors who once gossiped now whispered in awe as Daniel and Isabella walked out of the hospital together. Daniel no longer cared about their whispers. The only thing that mattered was Ethan, and the woman who had saved his life. Time passed, and Isabella gradually returned to the Carter mansion, but not as a servant. Daniel gave her a private room, treating her with complete respect. He never forgot the nights she had spent on the streets, and he swore such suffering would never touch her again. At first, Isabella kept her distance, but Ethan, with his innocence and unconditional love, became the bridge. Each time he reached out to her, each giggle, each playful cry, slowly broke down the walls around her heart. Daniel, too, had changed. He spent more time at home, caring for Ethan himself, sharing small responsibilities with Isabella. On quiet evenings, the three of them would sit in the living room, Ethan asleep on the sofa, while Daniel and Isabella whispered softly. In those moments, they realized, family is not only blood, but love and sacrifice. One weekend evening, Daniel took Isabella and Ethan to the park where she had once wandered, in despair. But this time, instead of a cold bench and tattered newspaper, there was a picnic blanket, a basket of pastries, and Ethan's laughter as he toddled around. Daniel looked at Isabella, his eyes gentler than ever. From his pocket, he pulled a small box, opening it to reveal a glistening ring. "Isabella," he said, voice steady yet trembling, "I made the worst mistake of my life when I let you go once. I can't lose you again. You've become the mother Ethan needs, and the woman I love. If you give me this chance, I promise I will spend the rest of my life proving I deserve you." Isabella froze. Tears welled, not of pain, but of an emotion too vast to name. She looked at Daniel, then at Ethan, who was smiling at her, as if waiting for her answer too. For a moment, her thoughts drifted to the tiny grave of her own lost child, the nights she had wept alone, milk flowing with no baby to hold. Now, fate had given her a second chance. "Daniel," she whispered, her hand trembling as it touched his. "I once lost everything, but through Ethan, through you, I found the meaning of family again. If this is truly what you want, then yes." Daniel smiled, tears glistening as he slipped the ring onto her finger. Ethan toddled over, hugging them both tightly, babbling in his innocent voice as if sealing the promise. They were a family. Beneath the starlit sky, Daniel slipped the ring onto her trembling finger, and Ethan wrapped his tiny arms around them both. For the first time, Isabella felt not like a maid, not like a broken mother, but like a woman truly loved. The scars of the past would never vanish, but under that sky, they no longer defined her. What defined her now was this: a second chance, a family bound not by blood alone, but by love, sacrifice, and forgiveness.